us through the Depression. Some say he lengthened it, but he concentrated power away from the states into the federal government with his New Deal socialist programs. And then Lyndon Johnson with his war on poverty, Great Society welfare state, concentrated power into the federal government. And even President Bush with the war on terror concentrated power, so the government now can read your emails, your text messages, and everything you purchase with a credit card, and every Google search you do, the government knows about it. It's a tremendous concentrating of power. Now, it's usually a short-term good, like ending slavery or stopping further terrorist attacks, but the power has been concentrating till now. It's all been given to the new administration and is put on an exponential curve, taking over car companies, banks, and the life and death decisions of every citizen in America. Ladies and gentlemen, we have returned to the situation of a monarch, and this is not what our founders intended. Now let's look at this for a second. You look at the tree and you see the bark, but sometimes you need to step back from the tree and look at the forest and see 6,000 years and where we fit in, and how the normal setting is monarchy. We did something different. Ronald Reagan said, "In this country of ours took place the greatest revolution that has ever taken place in world's history." He said, "Every other revolution simply exchanged one monarch for another. But in America, our founders believed that every man had the God-given right to determine his own destiny." Something happened unique in America that gave birth to the freest and most prosperous nation that this planet Earth has ever seen. But we've been gradually seeing a change. Now, those crises that I told you about where power was concentrated, some of those are coincidental, but it's interesting when you look at some of the philosophers that have existed. One is named Machiavelli. Have you ever heard of Machiavelli? Yep. Machiavelli lived 500 years ago in Italy. Now, Italy was not Italy 500 years ago. It was a lot of little city-states. Venice, Genoa, Siena, Perugia. They were their own city and their own country, and they all had navies, and they always fought. And Machiavelli thought if one prince could control all of Italy, it would stop all this infighting and there would be peace. So he wrote a book called The Prince for Lorenzo de' Medici, a rich guy in Florence. And in this book, he had a concept. The end justifies the means. The end of one prince controlling all of Italy is such a good end that any means necessary to get there is justified. Lying, cheating, stealing, murdering, raping, anything. So here's the scenario. If a prince wanted to conquer a city in his quest to unify Italy, and the city did not want to be conquered, they would hate him. But if this same prince paid somebody to burn barns, kill cows, create crisis and terror, the people would cry out for help. The prince would come in and kill the very guy that he bribed, and nobody would know the better for it, and all the people would praise the prince as a hero. So either way he conquers, one way he's hated, the other way he's loved. And it's really good marketing. You create the need and fill it. You go around the back of the house and set it on fire, and then you go around the front of the house and sell them a fire extinguisher, and they'll thank you for being there and pay anything for it. And so we see that when the President's Chief of Staff, Rahm Emanuel, makes a statement like, "Never let a good crisis go to waste," that is a Machiavellian statement, and that is a reason for concern. Now, there was another philosopher. Can I tell you another one? His name was Hegel. H-E-G-E-L. Hegel. He lived in Germany in the 1920s. And Hegel had a theory called dialectics. Now, it's not a diet method. It's a triangle. One corner is called thesis. The opposite corner is called antithesis or antithesis. And the top corner is called a synthesis. So the thesis is where the people are at. The synthesis is where you want to take them. So you first have to create the antithesis. In other words, you create a problem that's real bad, and everybody settles for your answer that's half as bad. And then that becomes the new starting point, the new thesis, and you create another problem that's real bad, and then everybody settles for your answer that's half as bad. And you do that over and over again till you move across the page from freedom to bondage, from separated power to concentrated power. Now, this guy, Hegel, inspired Karl Marx. And so Karl Marx built his communist theory on dialectics. What he did, 45 countries fell to communism. And the way they did it is they would send community organizers and labor organizers into countries to create an antithesis, to create a crisis, to organize the poor, to overthrow the rich, promising to spread the wealth around. And then when there was bloodshed in the streets, everybody gives up their rights to restore law and order, and they set up dictatorships. Stalin, Pol Pot, Ho Chi Minh, Castro, Mao Zedong, they all did this through this dialectic. You create the crisis, and they really didn't matter who the two sides were. Whether it was the rich against the poor, you know, the proletariat versus the bourgeois, or whether it was the blacks against the whites, the Catholics against the Protestants, the Christians against the Muslims. They really didn't care who the two sides were. They would just go in and find the ones that felt like they were on the bottom end and organize the have-nots, promising them to give them what the haves had, and they would organize them to create unrest, and they cause crises. And then once there's all kinds of fighting going on and bloodshed, people let go and the power is concentrated. So now we've talked about Machiavelli, we've talked about Hegel. We're going to have a test afterwards, so pay attention. But the third philosopher that adopted both of these is named Saul Alinsky. Catfish Willie mentioned him in one of his lines of his songs. Saul Alinsky was a community organizer in Chicago. Saul Alinsky wrote a book called Rules for Radicals. Hillary Clinton wrote her master's thesis on Saul Alinsky. Our current president taught Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals when he was a community organizer for Acorn in Chicago. He was their attorney. Saul Alinsky's book, Rules for Radicals, just as a side note, the dedication page is to Lucifer, to the first radical who rebelled against the authority and won his own kingdom, Lucifer. Well, in Saul Alinsky's book, he talks about a community organizer stirs up crises. The community organizer rubs raw the resentments of the community. He fans the flames of latent hostilities to the extent of overt expressions. He wants there to be racism. He wants there to be crisis. He wants to stir up this tension until there's unrest, and then the government has an excuse to consolidate and take power. Is this beginning to look like it's applicable to what we're seeing today? Now, when you look at who the president has surrounded himself with, I've found three categories. Correct me if I'm wrong, but those that are promoting an atheist homosexual agenda, those that are promoting an Islamic agenda, and those that are promoting a socialist communist agenda. I mean, is there anybody else that he's surrounded himself with? Please tell me. So we see something happening. Now, do you know there's two ways to set up a socialist government? Two ways. One is you march in with an army and kill those that resist. This is the way the USSR, the United Soviet Socialist Republic did it. This is the way the National Socialist Workers Party or Nazi Party did it, right? You go in with an army and kill those that resist, and you set up your socialist government. There's another way to set up a socialist government. You bankrupt the people into dependency. Now, if that sounds too strange, read the Bible, the book of Genesis. The story of Joseph in Egypt was 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. Now, I believe God's providence was there to rise up Pharaoh so he could show his power in knocking him down. But what happened that first year of famine? People said, bad economy. We don't have money for food. High unemployment. Government, take our cattle, give us food. Second year, it was still a famine. Government, high unemployment, take our land, give us food. Finally, take us, take our kids, take our posterity, just give us some crumbs. Now, what if you had a goal of concentrating power and you, on purpose, push through debt, push through taxes with the purpose of bankrupting the country so that people would be out of work, would not have health care, there would be a crisis, and what would they do? They would come begging to the government and say, government, take our land, take our kids, take our posterity, just give us some crumbs.